Thank you so much, all of you, for coming out to the first of our 3 educational sessions for council and mayoral candidates. I'm Michelle Ascension, the city clerk. My co-presenters are Jason Zaragoza and Dorina Padilla. A couple of housekeeping items. Hopefully you picked up the handouts on the table on your way in as you found your seat. We've got a copy of the slide presentation, the general qualifications booklet, a map of the district boundaries, and business cards for myself and for Jason. Restrooms are right through this door, and you hang a right and go into that open door over there. And I'd like to ask you to please silence your cell phones to minimize any interruptions. And with that, we'll get started. Okay, so we've been asked, why are we holding these presentations? And primarily it's because the decision to run for office is not one to be taken lightly. There are lots of things to consider before you take that leap. The best advice in life is always look before you leap, right? And that just means knowing as much as you can find out about where you're headed as possible. And ideally, that's before your feet leave the ground. This is a helpful session for those who may be undecided about running for office at this time. Hopefully, after this presentation, it'll kind of push you one way or the other. Either you'll come out of here saying, there is no way in heck I'm going to run, or you'll consider all the information, begin to analyze it, and say, you know, I think I can do this. I think this is something that'll work out for me. And it's not intended to scare you. It's intended to equip you with information to be able to make the best decision as to whether or not to make the leap. And information is power. So, the presentation will be conducted in 3 segments of approximately 15 minutes each. We're going to ask that you please hold your questions until the end. You can just go ahead and jot them on your handout. If you'd like to go back and review any of this information, it should be posted on the city's website, which is oxnard.org, within a week, by next Thursday. And you'll find the link that takes you directly to it on the homepage. So the first segment is going to be local government and the city council's role, presented by Jason Zaragoza, who was born and raised in Oxnard, a graduate of Oxnard High School, UCLA with a bachelor's in political science and communications, and a graduate of Loyola School of Law. He has served as the Oxnard Deputy City Attorney since February of 2017, and he and his wife Janice, who is also an Oxnard native, are proud to raise their infant daughter here in Oxnard. I'll be presenting the second segment, running for city council and district voting. Again, I'm Michelle Ascension. I was not born in Oxnard, but I was raised here from the age of 6, just over the bridge in the Lemonwood neighborhood here. It's funny that I have to look this up. Graduate of Santa Clara High School, Oxnard College, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, where I earned my bachelor's degree in journalism, and I've been a certified municipal clerk since 2009. I previously served as the city clerk of Port Hueneme for 8 years, the clerk of the board for the Ventura Regional Sanitation District for 1 year, and then I was elected in November of 2016 as the city clerk of the city of Oxnard. My husband David is an Oxnard native, and we are proud to call South Oxnard home for us and our 4 children. And then finally, the last segment, what you really need to know, is presented by Dorina Padilla. She was born and raised in Oxnard, graduate of Channel Islands High School, and a graduate of UCLA with a bachelor's in communications, and currently working on her master's in speech pathology. She works for Cal Lutheran University's Upward Bound program, an outreach program to low-income first-generation high school students in the Ventura County area. And at the age of 24, Dorina became the youngest candidate in recent memory to be elected to the Oxnard City Council in 2012, where she served until 2016. I think it's no coincidence that we've got native and longtime Oxnard residents here who have chosen to stay in Oxnard, raise our families in our hometown, and give back to the community that's given so much to us. We love this city. We feel very blessed to live here, and we consider it as one big Oxnard family. So we're happy to do our part to help you who also want to give back and serve to the community. So again, we're pleased to have you here tonight, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Hello. You guys hear me? Am I good? 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 Huh? Switch the mic. Can you hear me? Check. It's good? You guys hear me? Okay, so next slide. Next slide. All right, these are the topics we'll be discussing tonight: the city manager form of government, the role of the city attorney, the Brown Act, and the conflict of interest laws that exist here in California. This is our existing city council. So you've got a mayor, mayor pro tem, and council members. It is important to note that the mayor serves a 4-year term and the council members serve 2-year terms. 2-year terms, sorry, and the others serve 4-year terms. Thank you, Larry. The 2 other elected officials not pictured there are the city clerk and the city treasurer. Go ahead, next slide. This is important to show you because I think there is a misperception out there that the city council micromanages and is involved with the day-to-day kind of admin duties of the city. And this is up here to show you that, in fact, the city council appoints the city manager and the city attorney. Under the city attorney's office, there are assistant city attorneys, a deputy, which is myself, a paralegal, and an office manager. And the city manager is responsible for the day-to-day admin duties of the city. So the city manager implements policies established by city council, appoints and disciplines employees, enforces ordinances, makes recommendations to city council, etc. But again, the city council is not the kind of admin authority of the staff. The city council hires the city manager and the city attorney. Next slide. So this is just here to give you an idea of the full scope of work that is done in the city of Oxnard. I think there is a misconception that we're still sort of a small city, when in fact I believe we are the 17th largest city in the state, the 11th largest city in Southern California. We are a full service city, which means we've got police, fire, utilities, over 1,300 employees, and a budget of over $400 million. I think that's the case, Jesus. Yes? How much? 427. So again, just to give you an idea of the scope of kind of the services that are offered in the city, and if you decide to run for council, ultimately the sorts of decisions that you will be making and kind of the breadth of what those decisions entail. Next slide. One more thing. Actually, no, we can go with this. So the functions of the council, and the council does have broad powers, but really the functions of the council are to promote sound financial management, to respond to current and future needs of residents and businesses, enact ordinances, and then to approve and oversee budget expenditures. And I have this here, the actions part, because again, I think there's a misconception out there that one council member can bind the city council to certain decisions, when in fact, the city council will only be bound to decisions, and ultimately the city, that are acted upon by at least a majority of the council. So in our case, right now we have 5 council members, so it would require 3 affirmative votes for any action to take place. Once we expand to a 7-member council, it would require 4 votes for an action to take place. Next slide. So this is just to give you an idea of how often council meets, although this does change. Regular meetings are scheduled the first 4 Tuesdays of each month, and there are some exceptions when holidays occur, etc. And they occur at the council chambers, 305 West 3rd. They are live streamed on oxnard.org. And then for Spectrum subscribers, they're on channel 10. And then for Frontier, which used to be Verizon, I believe, they're on channel 35. And the meetings occur no earlier than 4:30 p.m. I think Dorina will get into what you really need to know and explain how, although this is the kind of schedule that sets forth, there are additional meetings that are added, and these time constraints are, often these meetings can run pretty long. But this is just to give you an idea of the general nature of the meetings. Next slide. Okay, so this is the city council's, really the state's open meetings law, the Brown Act. So if you're a commissioner, you are aware, and I see you rolling your eyes, you are aware of the Brown Act. So just by way of kind of historical reference, in the early 1950s, in 1951, there was a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle who began to look into how municipal governments were having their meetings. And although there were laws on the books that said you had to have these meetings open to the public, he ended up doing this 10-part series in the San Francisco Chronicle called Your Secret Government, that kind of uncovered all of these instances of local governing bodies meeting in private. Ultimately, this led to the creation of our Open Meetings Law, the Brown Act, which was carried by Ralph M. Brown through the state legislature. And although the law has changed slightly since 1953, the soul of the Brown Act still remains intact, and I think it's right here. The purpose of the Brown Act is to ensure that local governmental bodies conduct the people's business openly. Go ahead. So it's important to note that the Brown Act only applies to meetings of the legislative body, right? So you, and this applies to councils and commissions, you as a commissioner here, just because you're discussing any given matter right now doesn't mean that this is subject to the Brown Act. And so the question becomes, well, what is a meeting? Next slide. So the Brown Act defines a meeting as any congregation of a majority of the members of this, in this case it would be city council, at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of that legislative body. Now, it seems like a lot, but really, all this means is that if you're going to meet, and there is, in the council's case right now, at least 3 of 5 members meeting, then that meeting is subject to the Brown Act, which means you have certain notice requirements, which means that your meeting has to be open to the public, absent some exemptions. Some issues are dealt with in closed session. However, this is the general rule on meetings. Next slide. So here's one thing to be aware of. I'm not going to go into all the intricacies of the Brown Act because you'll probably go to sleep. But it is important to note that sometimes you can violate the Brown Act even without doing so purposefully. And this occurs when members of a council or a commission have a serial meeting, right? So there are 5 members of an elected body. I discuss an issue. This is a daisy chain serial meeting. I discuss a meeting with Dorina, an issue with Dorina. Dorina then discusses that issue with Michelle with another council member, and so on. So although we haven't met per se, we have conducted business or tried to get a consensus without actually meeting, and that would be a violation of the Brown Act. An additional example is here, the hub and spoke. So with the hub and spoke serial meeting, that's when I contact Dorina to get her opinion on a given item. And then I go and contact Michelle, and then I contact Larry, and then I contact Jesus. So although, again, we haven't met, I have now created a serial meeting under the Brown Act. And then on the topic of, there's another important thing to mention here with serial meetings. Nowadays, we have to be really cognizant of email communications. Let's say that I email the entire council and I don't blind copy them, and then council members respond to each other and they start discussing a given issue. Well, now you may have a serial meeting created via email with using the reply all function of that email, which is why in our office it is our practice to email councils and commissions by blind copy, and so that there's no way to really violate the Brown. Well, there are ways to circumvent it, but that's a safer approach. And then I'll also mention, with regard to emails, as a council member, be mindful of the fact that your communications, whether they are by personal device or by a city-issued device, so long as they pertain to city business, they are subject potentially to disclosure under the Public Records Act. Okay, so what that means is, let's say you go home and you're using a city-issued laptop or your own laptop, and you fire off an email related to any given city business, that can potentially be disclosed under the Public Records Act if somebody makes a request. Just an FYI to be mindful of that while we're on the topic of email. Next slide. So these are just basic agenda posting requirements under the Brown Act. Regular meetings, agendas must be posted 72 hours prior to the meeting. And for special meetings, the agenda must be posted 24 hours prior to the meeting. In practice, we post these agendas well in advance, and they're posted on Oxnard.org, and they're also posted at the kiosk near council chambers. Is there anything else I wanted to say? Oh, and the purpose of the agenda, for those of you that are not familiar, and we probably should have had a picture up here of an agenda, is to notify you and members of the public of what the council is going to be discussing. So we will have a subject and a recommendation, and again, all in the name of notifying the public of what the legislative body is going to be considering, so you have an opportunity to weigh in. Next slide. Okay, so these are potential penalties for violating the Brown Act. Civil enforcement actions, you can just keep going. These are generally brought by the local DA or any interested party. And one of the key things to remember here is if you've made a decision and you violated the Brown Act while doing so, the decision can be nullified, meaning that it gets undone. So that's important to remember as a council member, right? If you're making any sort of decision on a contract or any sort of streets paving project or something, and you violated the Brown Act in doing so, in the worst circumstances, in terms of a civil enforcement action, that decision could be nullified. There are misdemeanor criminal sanctions for intentional violations of the Brown Act, which include up to 6 months in jail or a $1,000 fine, and of course, intense media scrutiny that are associated with that. Go ahead. So another thing I wanted to touch on, that's kind of basic Brown Act stuff. Obviously, if you have additional questions, we'll be taking questions after all three of us present if you wanted to ask more on the Brown Act. It's important to note, if you're interested in running for council, that conflict of interest laws will apply to you. The big ones are the Political Reform Act and Government Code Section 1090. But here, your sole motivation for being a public official or for running for council should always be the public's interests, right? As a public servant, you shouldn't be looking to benefit financially from your position. And always remember this, right? Trustworthiness. So you're serving in a position of power, and the people are entrusting you with that power, that you do the right thing and you're not in it to benefit personally or financially. Go ahead. So again, the topics of law to be discussed tonight, and there are other laws, bribery laws, etc., but we're really going to touch on the two major ones, which are the Political Reform Act and Government Code Section 1090. And then important to note, if you are a council member, if you become a council member, you will be required to attend a training. It's called AB 1234 or 1234 training, which is ethics training that encompasses all this in great detail. And you'll have to do that once every 2 years. So here's the general rule under the Political Reform Act. You may not participate in a decision if your financial interests are affected by that decision. We've also got this rule here that states that you shall not, that the city official or employee shall even avoid the appearance of a conflict between your city duties and your personal interest. And again, that goes to the heart of trustworthiness, right? So what you should always be thinking in the back of your mind is, do I benefit financially from this decision? And if so, you should not participate in that decision. Go ahead. Oh, there you go. So the basic question is, does this decision involve my financial interests? Go ahead. So what are your financial or economic interests? Well, you have personal finances, right, including your immediate family. Any source of income that is $500 or more in the past 12 months, and then gifts totaling $470 per year. And it's important if you become a council member to be mindful of this 470 number, because that changes from time to time. So it's been higher, it's been lower. I think it's been higher. I know it's been lower for sure. Or any contract in which you or your family members would have an interest. So again, if you're a council member, you will always have to consider these issues when a contract comes up, right? If you've got a personal financial interest in that, you would recuse yourself from making a decision. And recusal involves basically announcing that you're recusing yourself, why you're doing so, getting up and stepping outside of the room. Go ahead. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So this also applies to your partner, your spouses, your immediate family. So be mindful of that, especially, there are folks who have certain business interests or whatever here in the city, and you have to be mindful of that when you're making these decisions. Go ahead. So here are the penalties associated with violating the Political Reform Act, and they are pretty major: invalidation of a decision, a misdemeanor, or jail. And we're not putting these up here to scare you. It's just you have to know what the potential consequences are. Go ahead, you can go to the next one. Penalties continue. Yeah, we're not meaning to scare you. Penalties continued. Go back? You can go back. Attorney's fees, right? So should somebody sue you for any sort of violation, you would be responsible for attorney's fees if you lose, yours and theirs. Embarrassment, removal from office, and inability to run from office again. So very serious. The state takes these very serious. So should you. Go ahead. This is sort of falls in between, but I thought it's important to mention. And in going over this, Dorena thought it was important to mention as well the gift limitations that we have. As a council member, the state limit is $470 per year from a single source. Anything above that, you can't. You have anything to add to this one, Jesus? And you have to report any gift of $50 or more from a single source, and you do that via your Form 700. Go ahead. So these are your basic requirements. You will have a Form 700 form. And again, the basic question here that you're going to want to ask is, does the decision involve my own or my family's financial interests? If the answer is yes, recuse yourself. I'll go over this one quickly. This is Government Code Section 1090, which basically says that you can't make or participate in any contract that the city enters into in your official capacity if you're financially interested. And there are limited exceptions to this, but this is the basic rule. Go ahead. Back with the penalties. So the contract is void, disgorgement of all monies, $1,000 fine, and a felony of up to 3 years in prison. So again, take these rules very seriously. People have gotten into hot water over this. Certainly our job in the city attorney's office is to ensure that these sorts of things don't become an issue. Obviously, if these are brought to our attention, we do so. But our advice in the city attorney's office cannot shield you from any sort of civil or criminal action. Only an advice letter from the FPPC can do that. We can't shield you from any of that. We can only advise you. Go ahead. So best practices, keep the public's interest foremost in your decision making, and look at every decision and ask yourself, whether it involves some kind of financial interest of yours or your family's. I think if you just kind of remember these two basic things, then you don't have to know the intricacies of 1090 or the Political Reform Act, but you should always be mindful of these things. Go ahead. And these are just a series of values. You have these in your packet, so I'm not going to read them off, but it's to be a model local government for ethical behaviors, to tell the truth, have policies and practices that support our ethics, to act in the best interest of the public at all times, etc. Next slide. And then there are additional resources for you in your packet. If you wanted to read more about the Brown Act, that is actually a great source for learning about the Brown Act. It breaks things down in simple terms. Elections information is there, as well as Political Reform Act information. And if you're going to be a council member, you're going to want to know about the city code and what ordinances we have on the books. So you may want to go ahead and take a look at the city code as well. And that's all I got. Thanks.
Well done, Jason. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about running for city council and district voting. So council districts, we're going to cover how we got here and how district voting is the same as at-large voting, but slightly different. And then we're going to talk about running for city council and mayor. And everything that I'm covering is expanded upon much more in your general qualifications booklet, so please feel free after this session is over to read that more in depth. But we'll go over the basic qualifications, we'll talk a little bit about money, which is always a pleasant topic. If you decide to move forward with becoming a candidate, we'll talk about what you'll need to do during the nomination period, a little bit of information on the campaign period, and then a little bit about election day. Okay, so we're going to show a short video about how we got here with the council districts. Keep in mind, this was created in January to explain the upcoming process. The city of Oxnard has already completed all these steps, but it's still a good educational, quick 2-minute education on what this council district thing means, how the whole thing got started, and the process of ultimately getting to districts.
On November 27, 2017, the Oxnard City Council adopted a resolution declaring its intent to consider transitioning to district-based elections.
Why is the city considering transitioning to district-based elections?
The California Voting Rights Act, or CVRA, allows challenges to at-large election systems. Oxnard has an at-large election system where voters of the entire city elect all members of the City Council. On October 9th, 2017, the city received a letter threatening litigation if the City Council elections are not transitioned from the current at-large system to district-based elections. Along with 70 other cities and 155 school districts across the state, Oxnard is now considering the transition.
What happens if the city transitions to district-based elections?
The city would be carved into geographic districts, and voters living in each of those districts would choose their City Council representative, who must also live in that district.
What is the timeline to consider transitioning to district-based elections?
Before deciding whether to transition to district-based elections, the City Council will hold public hearings to review the districting process and to hear public input about potential communities of interest to form the districts. The City Council will then hold additional public hearings to discuss district boundaries and the sequencing of elections.
Who creates the districts?
A professional demographer and you. You can submit a district map for consideration by January 5th, 2018.
Who decides the district boundaries?
Your Oxnard City Council.
What can I do?
Get involved. Log on to oxnard.org/districts for a complete timeline of important information and upcoming meetings. You'll also find an interactive tool to draw your own map. Help shape the future of your city. This is a message from your Oxnard City Clerk, Michelle Ascension.
Thank you. Okay, so as we said, that process is completed. It took 6 public hearings, 65 draft maps, but finally in March of this year, the final map was adopted by the City Council, and it brought us into compliance with the California Voting Rights Act of 2002, which was created with the intention to ensure that every segment of the community is represented equally. So now we have our 6 districts that are elected in staggered 4-year terms. This year it'll be districts 1, 2, and 5 for a 4-year term, and then district 6 for a 2-year term. That'll bring them to their regular rotation of 2020, where they'll also be elected for a 4-year term along with district 3 and 4. And I just, for fun, out of curiosity, by a show of hands, or rather fingers, I want to see if everyone here knows what district they live in. So hold up the number of fingers of your district. Okay, I think you're not in 6, Larry. Okay, it looks like everybody knows. That's good. That's good. So if you find someone who doesn't know, then you can direct them to our website, oxnard.org/districts, and we've got a really handy interactive map to be able to punch in an address, and it takes you right to it on the map. So what does district-based voting mean for you as a potential candidate? Well, a lot of it is the same from at-large voting, but there are a few differences which we'll look at right now. So number 1, city council elections are held every 2 years with staggered 4-year terms, and the mayor election is held every 2 years. That hasn't changed, but what's different is that city council members are now elected by district, representing a defined geographic area, and it's now a 7-member council, which is 6 council members plus 1 mayor, and 3 of the council members are elected at a time. Next, a candidate must be a registered voter of the city of Oxnard, but council candidates have to live within a district that's up for election. And again, the mayor's office is still at large. Actually, the way you can look at it is the mayor's district is the entire city. So, candidates must be nominated by other registered voters. That's the same. But council candidates' nominations may only come from within their own district. Any candidate needs to pay a printing deposit to publish their candidate statement in the voter information guide, which is also known as the sample ballot. But council candidate deposit amounts are reduced now that the voter guide is only being published within their own district rather than citywide. And then finally, elected officials serve and act on behalf of the entire city, regardless of district residents, and that actually hasn't changed. You're still expected to do what's in the best interest of the city as a whole. So the steps for running for council or mayor. First, you've got to meet the basic qualifications to run for office, and then there's the nomination period, the process you need to complete to become a candidate on the ballot. If you successfully complete those 2 steps, you can move on to campaigning and ultimately Election Day. So the basic qualifications to run for office are actually very, very basic. You've got to be at least 18, a U.S. citizen, and registered to vote. And if you're in the council, you have to reside in the council district that's up for election. But again, the mayor's district is citywide. So if you meet those 3 requirements, congratulations, you qualify to run for office. You don't need a degree or experience or to have lived in the city for any particular amount of time. But please note at the bottom where I have it in all caps and bold and underlined and asterisked that you need to verify your registered name and address with the county elections office before the nomination period opens, so that we can have that part kind of squared away before, we get into the whole candidate thing. Okay, so let's talk money. I'm often asked, how much does it cost to run for city council? It used to be you didn't have to spend one single dime. I don't know how successful you would be, but you didn't have to spend any money. About 2 months ago, a new fee was added, which is a $25 candidate processing fee. So now, at minimum, it will cost you $25. If you want to publish a candidate statement in the voter guide, it's $800 for council and $1,325 for mayor for the printing deposit. So if you're considering doing this, you might want to start saving up. And aside from the printing deposit, you can spend up to $2,000 of your own money. But if you exceed the $2,000 or you accept contributions of any amount from anyone else, you have to do what's called opening a campaign committee, which is establishing a separate bank account for your campaign funds so that they're not commingled with your personal funds. If you open a committee, you can spend as much money as you want, as the city of Oxnard does not currently have any campaign finance limitations. People also ask me how much, or do council members get paid? The answer is yes, they do. The council and the mayor get the same thing, $20,412.08 a year, plus some benefits. And if you're appointed to outside boards, some of those pay an additional stipend through their respective agencies. So to become a candidate, you have to get nominated. The nomination period is from July 16th through August the 9th. And the first step is to make an appointment with the city clerk's office to do what's known as pull papers. So you'll call or email my office to make an appointment, and like I mentioned, there's business cards on the table. You'll need to expect to spend about 30 minutes with me to go through everything, and you need to be prepared at that time to pay the $25 candidate processing fee. And as a note down at the bottom there, you also need to be aware that the county elections office requires the cities to notify them when someone has pulled papers. And at that time, your name and your contact information that you've provided with me are public record as a potential candidate. So if you start getting calls or emails from the newspaper, that's why. If you want to create a dedicated phone number or email address just for your campaign, you should do that before you come see me, because as soon as you leave, or because before you leave, I will need to have contact information on file for you. Okay, so step 2 is completing your paperwork. Any Monsters, Inc. fans in the house? There's this great character named Roz that I can totally relate to, because every day she's telling him, "You didn't complete your paperwork, Wazowski." And that's how I feel during the nomination period, is I'm going, come on, Mr. or Ms. candidate, got to get your paperwork done. But that nomination form is where you'll, let me back up. When you come in to have your appointment with me, you'll receive a nice binder with all kinds of information in it, including the nomination form, which is where you'll get your signatures of the registered voters that are nominating you. Your ballot designation form, which is the 1 to 3 word phrase that describes your principal occupation or profession that will accompany your name on the ballot. The candidate statement form, your 200-word statement that can be printed in the voter guide, and again, that's optional because there's a cost associated with it. the Code of Fair Campaign Practices, which is a voluntary pledge to run a clean, honest, non-discriminatory campaign, and FPPC Forms 501, which is your statement of intention, your 470 or your 410, depending on whether you're opening a campaign committee or not, and the Form 700, which is your statement of economic interests. These all need to be completed as early as possible. Even though the nomination period is 4 weeks long, you want to submit everything as early as possible so that if there's an issue, you have time to correct it before the nomination period ends. Okay, so step 3. You've got to make another appointment now to file your paperwork. When everything's completed, another 30-minute appointment to review everything, and you're also going to need to be prepared to pay your printing and deposit at that time if you're going to be publishing a candidate a candidate statement. And from there, we submit everything to the county elections office, and we await notification from them that everything is in order. And if so, congratulations, you're a candidate, and you can begin campaigning. Okay, so the campaign period, August 11th, or whenever you qualify as a candidate through the day before election, or technically election day. You can pay for voter lists from the county elections, so you can do precinct walkings or send mailers. You'll likely be invited to participate in candidate forums or debates. If you open a committee, you'll have to submit at least 2 pre-election statements of your campaign expenditures and contributions on the form that's known as the Form 460 through the FPPC. And about the end of September to early October, the county starts mailing their voter information guides, which will have your statement in it if you chose to publish it. And then about a week or 2 after that, the vote-by-mail ballots are sent out. Information on signs, mailers, and advertisements is included in your general qualifications booklet, but you should also refer to FPPC Manual 2, which is a comprehensive guide for all the rules on all those things. But I will want to make a quick mention of signs. They should not be placed until after you are declared an official candidate, and they need to be taken down within 10 days after the election. That brings us to Election Day, which this year is November the 6th. The polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8, as they always are. You as a candidate will need to keep in mind the 100-foot rule, where campaigning is prohibited within 100 feet of the door of a polling place, and of course, not allowed within the polling place either. So that includes not talking to people, passing out literature, no signs, no buttons, no t-shirts saying vote for me, and that's by you or anyone else. And after the polls close at 8 o'clock, the county will post on their website the first count of the early vote-by-mail ballots and update the results throughout the night as ballots are counted from the polls. And it may take up to 4 weeks for the county to certify the election. So I've included some websites as resources as well. You can also contact me if you have any questions. I think a few of my websites are duplicates from Jason's. But anyway, with that, I thank you for your attention, and I turn it over now to Dorina for what you really need to know.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Dorina Padilla. I am former councilwoman to the city of Oxnard. And when Michelle reached out to me to possibly do these presentations, I very willingly said yes. And just a few weeks ago, I told my mom I was going to participate in 3 different sessions. And if many of you don't know, but summertime is one of my busiest times. I actually have 165 high school students moving into the dorms at CLU, and I'm going to be responsible for them starting Sunday. So we're getting ready for that. So summer is a very busy time for me. But and my mom mentioned, hey, mija, you know, you're going to be busy. Why did you commit yourself to doing these presentations? And I told her very candidly, I said, Mom, I committed to them because I wish I would have had the insight and I would have had the guidance when I was running. Because as Michelle mentioned at the very beginning, you're going to be taking a leap. And when she mentioned that it would be good for you to know what it is you're getting yourself into, I had no idea. When I ran, and to give you guys a bit of a perspective, I graduated college in 2010, so in 2010. In 2012, when I decided to run, I was just getting myself engaged in my professional career. So I had very little knowledge as to what it took to run a city and really what it entailed to be a council member. So I want to make sure that community members who are thinking about possibly taking that leap, that they understand what it entails and the commitment you have to make to your city, to its residents when you're a council member. So with that said, we'll get started and go into the details. Next slide. Oh yeah, I can do this. And what do I press? Oh, okay. So why I ran. So again, I was a recent graduate. I was getting myself very accustomed to my professional role. I had just started a year ago within my position at CLU, and I got a phone call. I got a phone call from one of my former counselors in high school, and she mentioned to me, she's told me, hey Drina, we're gonna get a group of young professionals. We're gonna get a group of young professionals to run for public office in different arenas within the city of Oxnard. You know, I told her, you know what, let me think about it. So we got together as a group, they proposed the different positions, and they mentioned, hey, there's a position open for the city of Oxnard, you should really think about it. At the time, I was contemplating doing a master's in public policy at CLU, and I figured, if anything else, running for council will be a great experience. At the time, there was 2 open seats, 13 people running. I told myself it'll be a great experience, I'll learn a lot. What are the chances? I remember thinking that to myself. And then, you know, that was one thing. I said it'll be a great experience. Another thing, at the time, in 2010, there was a district attorney's report that on an investigation that had been done on the city of Oxnard. In 2010, the results were published. And in 2012, people were still trying to decipher, we're living with that particular document. And I read through the DA's report, and there was issues with respects to record keeping, proper financial records. There were issues with city employees, city council members receiving gifts, going to Laker games, Dodger games, all those conflicts of interest that were addressed earlier. There were some major issues within the city of Oxnard with respects to all of those things. And I remember thinking to myself, I work for a federally funded grant program where every single dollar has to be accounted for. You have to provide records for everything that you do, and everything that you do has to be justified. So as an individual coming from that background, I could not imagine a city not abiding by those same type of standards. So when I read the DA's report, I thought to myself, oh my God, something has to change. And if I have a background in how things should be done, then I should run. So that the DA's report was one of the things that really made me and encouraged me to actually run. And again, my experience with Upward Bound was a big thing. I knew, and I had a background in how not necessarily state-funded or programs ran, but I did have experience with how federally funded programs ran and how I won. So I'll tell people all the time that I believe that my ability to win was, or I would be able to contribute my ability to win with the fact that I did run with a cohort of 5 individuals. So after that meeting, 5 of us decided to run for public office. I ran for city council. Manuel Vasquez, who I went to high school with, also ran for city council. Then there was Vianney Lopez. She ran for the, I believe, District Port Hueneme, the school board for Port Hueneme. Sylvia Lozama ran for the school board of the Oxnard High School District. And then Sergio Lagunas ran for the Oxnard Elementary School District. So there was 5 of us. So we ran as a cohort of 5. Each of us had the same message. You want change? We are educated. We can think analytically, critically about issues. Elect us, because we will bring forth that change. And that was our message. And we ran. So, and I tell people this is important because even if I didn't know Manuel's sphere of influence or sphere of, they knew that I was running with him. So he was able to tell, oye tia, you know what, I'm running, but Doreena's also running. So make sure you go out and vote. So I was able to leverage the contacts of 4 other individuals, because even if they didn't know me, they knew I was running with Sergio Lagunas. And if I was running with Sergio Lagunas and we ran under the same mantra, then hey, she deserves my vote. So and I think that contributed greatly to my ability to really garner the support that I received. That, and I was able to leverage my contacts with my students. So we would walk every Saturday from about 8 in the morning to until we got tired. I would get a minivan full of my Upward Bound students and we would flyer. And I would tell them, hey, you want some volunteer hours and you want to get civically engaged with your community? Join me. And so we did a lot of walking during that time. But again, I had a clear, concise message that people could understand and relate to. And I do think that also had a contributing factor with my overall success in the campaigning process. I was genuine. I had no ties to any type of interest group because, I mean, I had just graduated from college. There was no way I had any ties with any interest groups because I knew no interest groups. So, yeah, that's why I ran, and I believe those were the reasons why I got elected. Oh yeah, break it down, yeah. So what I learned, the fun never ends. So when I got elected in 2012, here's what I had thought. Oh, you know, great, I'm a city council member. I'll be able to work full-time. I'll be able to do council, and I'll still be able to do my master's program. And let me tell you, that idea went out the window the first week I was elected onto council. And because you think, okay, well, it's just 1 meeting every week. I can handle 1 meeting every week. They don't tell you, and again, I didn't know, not that they didn't tell me, maybe I didn't ask the right questions because I jumped straight into campaigning. So you have Tuesday meetings, but on Mondays you debrief with the city manager. And you also have to make sure you read the agenda thoroughly, which takes time, if you're committed to doing a good job. So I would spend hours just going through the agenda, reading the addendums, the information. So you have your Tuesday meetings, Monday debriefings. In addition to that, sometimes you'll have special closed session meetings during the week. And then you have requests from community events and community groups. And above and beyond that, they don't tell you that as a council member, it is your responsibility to be part of different boards. So I was part of the Oxnard Downtown Management District, the Downtown Improvement Task Force, the Visitors and Conventions Bureau, the Youth Commission, the Homelessness Task Force, Arts and Public Places, and all of these commissions, at least the ones that I was a part of when I initially ran, have monthly meetings. And monthly meetings that typically take place during the workday. Sometimes they'll take place, like the Youth Commission, because of dealing with youth, would take place in the afternoon. But again, I didn't know this going in. I thought, again, Tuesday meetings, I can handle it. But I wish I would have known what the commitment entailed. And I learned very quickly, and lucky for me, my employer, and lucky for me that I didn't have a family other than my mom and dad, but I was able to transition and make and adapt. But it is a process of adaptation, and you do have to fit your schedule around your responsibilities of a council member. And I see Bert Perello in the audience. I remember when he first got elected, there was a meeting where we had to redistribute committees. And I think prior or before that meeting, he mentioned something about his social life going out the window. And I think my comment to him was, hey, join the club. Because your social life is very limited because of your commitment to your residents, to your city. So that's something that you should know, and you should know going in, that it does take a lot of time. And when I got elected to council, we used to have meetings that would start at 4:30 and typically end at 1 o'clock in the morning. My longest meeting went until 3:30 in the morning. So it was a struggle, and I do hope that that's not the case anymore. I typically get updated with what the council is doing via the newspaper. I don't typically see the meetings, but it is a big commitment, and it requires patience, it requires time, and it requires the support of your families and the support of your employers and the support of your friends. Because at least for 4 years, I was running through life. I was sprinting through life. Where you're sprinting, you know that the world's happening around you, but you really don't get a sense of really definitively what's taking place. So that's something that you should know. And there is another thing that I wish I would have known. There is no easy issue. So when I first got elected, and I'll give you an example. When I first got elected, they were proposing Fire Station 8. So Fire Station 8 is the fire station within walking distance here to the school. So just raise of hands, when you think of a fire station, is that something that typically brings good things to your mind? I mean, socially, right? Fire stations are good. Firemen are good. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, it's a direct service to public safety, public health, and I lived on the south end of town. So I thought, oh my God, what a great social structure to have on the south end of town. You as a child don't want to be a fireman unless you see them driving down your street or you pass by their fire station. So I thought, piece of cake. Fire stations, who doesn't want a fire station in their backyard? And there was a need for it in accordance. So I went to the first public forum, and I remember sitting in the forum, and I was in awe because there was so much discussion, animosity, pushback over a fire station. And I remember at the end of that meeting turning to Irene Pinkert, who had just left City Council, and I turned to her and I very candidly told her, Irene, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me this is how it was going to be? And some of the issues were valid issues, but I make that point because there's no easy issue. Every single issue has different perspectives, different flaws, different benefits that have to be weighted. So you have to be able to think critically and be able to analyze what it is that you're being presented. So that's another thing. And then being a full-service city, and this is where, above and beyond the service to my community, I learned a tremendous amount about different types of issues. As a full-service city, I mean, we spent months talking on trash talking. And when I say trash, it's contracts with Del Norte facilities, the transition of that contract back to the city, where we were going to take you never think about those things. You talk about unions and contracts with union members. You deal with, again, wastewater, water, streets, public works projects, legal matters, legal issues, issues that deal with HR. So above and beyond my service to the community, one of the biggest things that I took from being council member is that I got to learn about a broad range of different subjects, different issues that were all relevant to the city. And they were relevant to the city because the city of Oxnard is a full-service city. So it's a complex array of different issues that you have to actually address as a council member. And above and beyond that, so I wanted to kind of provide you with the context, what it means, what are the commitments, but really why you should run. As a council member, I truly believe that above any other political position that you might have, as a council member, you have the ability to have a transformative effect on your community now. There will be decisions, and these are not all decisions, but there will be decisions that you make that you will see the effect of those decisions the next day, the next week, maybe 1 or 2 years. But to think that and a decision that you make now affects your community, your parents, your grandparents, your children. And that to me is probably one of the main reasons you should run. Because if you want to make a change in your community, being a city council member will allow you to do that. Even if you don't necessarily see through the initiative that you want to implement, you can at least start the conversation. When I was a member of the Downtown Improvement Task Force, one of the business members made mention that, hey, a lot of the lights within the downtown are broken. So whose responsibility is that? Well, it's technically so-and-so's responsibility. So within the next week, we were able to get the lights back on. So again, even simple things that make a drastic change, you as a council member can provide that impetus, that nexus from, hey, this is a need. Let me bring it up and see what can be done. Let me start the conversation. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So yes, it's a big commitment. Yes, you spend hours in council chambers. Yes, you spend hours going over the agenda. But if you're committed to your community and you have the will to make a change, then being a council member will allow you to do just that. And this last one, and I wanted to, and I didn't put it up on the slides, but sometimes they ask me, well, what do I need to do, or what qualities do I need to have to be a council member? And really, I break it down into 3. You have to be able to think critically and analytically about any issue that's presented to you. And other than that, you have to have a genuine interest in doing good for your community. And I put this up there because every single time before a council meeting, I would say this in my mind during the moment of silence. I would say, Diosito, te pido que me des la fortaleza, la sabiduría y la paciencia para poder hacer tu trabajo y el trabajo de esta comunidad. God, I ask you to give me the patience, the wisdom, and the strength to do your work and the work of this community. And if you're able to internalize that, and if that's your goal and if that's your prerogative, then you have it in you to be a council member. And I say you have it in you because I spent $600 of my own monies to run, and I was able to win. So it's not, I don't think it's directly tied with how much monies you have. It's really, I have a genuine interest to serve my community. And how do I make sure that that interest, I can communicate that with individuals in a concise and clear manner and be able to garner their support. So I'll leave it at that. I hope I provided some insight as to what it is to be a council member. Again, that's just my perspective. And I would have continued had I not made the decision to grow professionally. So I'm currently in the process of getting my master's, but maybe one day I'll take the leap of faith once more. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dorena, for your perspective. That was very, very helpful. And I'm sure for all of you that was probably a lot of information to take in. Hopefully this presentation has helped provide you with some useful things to consider as you contemplate your future as a possible elected official. Thank you again so much for coming out. We're really pleased that you were here. We're available anytime by email. Thank you, Dorena. Thank you, Jason. And thank you all, and have a safe drive back home.